Hello everyone. I'm going to talk to you about one part of Chapter 4, the section on guidance on selecting studies. So this was part of Chapter 7 in the previous edition and is a new inclusion in Chapter 4. So just to get you orientated, it didn't used to be part of the searching chapter. In bringing this over, the main authors on this section were Chris Marshall, James Thomas and myself, but we had a lot of input from lots of anonymous and known commenters, and also from the Handbook editorial team. So I'm just going to talk through a couple of the things that have changed since the previous edition. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the focus on studies, not articles. Now, this is not a new thing. The previous edition was quite clear that the focus of review should be studies, not the BMJ article alone. The guidance on the differentiating studies and articles has been expanded slightly. And what we've tried to do is make it a bit clearer that a single study might have many forms of documentation attached to it. So as well as the full papers, there might also be an ongoing, a trial record, ongoing or completed, a conference abstract, or maybe several conference abstracts. So a study is made up of several publications, and the new section highlights the fact that these may not always be standard journal articles. The other thing that we try to emphasize more in this new edition is the fact that we're interested not just in the studies where we can get hold of the results, but also studies where we can't get hold of the results. And it's quite sort of clear now that we want people to be aware that you might have a trial record and a conference abstract, but you can't actually get hold of the full publication. Either it's published and unobtainable, or it's still being published, or whatever. So it's really important that we don't forget about the study B, where we have some information but not the full results yet. And these need to be listed clearly in the review. So it's just to say that there's now more information to make it a lot clearer that there are various contributions to a study. The other thing to note is that identifying these so-called duplicate publications, they're not often duplicates, they're often different aspects of papers, that there are ways to identify these documents that relate to the single study. And there are new ways to try and identify these. So this really is just a slight expansion of the previous edition to remind people that trial identifiers and other study identifiers, perhaps manufacturers' serial numbers, are also helpful if they get a mention in the document in linking that document to a particular study. So this has just been a slight expansion. The other thing that gets a sort of a new emphasis in the current edition is the fact that different documents about a study can provide different pieces of information to enrich our knowledge of that study. So, for example, for a given study A, we might pick up some new methods information from the clinical trial record, and also that not all the outcomes may be in the main paper. There may be other papers that report specific outcomes. So, for example, you will often find an economic evaluation that has been carried out alongside a trial in a separate paper, and also things like the quality of life outcomes captured in a trial may be reported in a separate paper. So this is trying to emphasize that we should be looking at all of these resources, because they may all contribute information to our knowledge of the study, and also going to say, for example, the quality of life paper would make most sense if you are trying to find the quality of life outcomes. In terms of the study selection process, there was a very, very slight reordering, and quite, and just some sort of emphasis on the fact that it is important to, if you have queries about documents relating to a study, to write to the authors. But the main sort of new emphases in the study selection process guide is about recording information on incomplete and unobtainable records, making sure they're tagged and making sure they're listed in the studies table of studies awaiting assessment. So also making sure that ongoing trials are tagged and adding to the ongoing studies table. So really trying to make sure that when the updates happen, we've actually got some information to be going on, hopefully that these things will then have been A, obtainable, and B, that ongoing trials may have reported. So it's sort of maybe just taking the study selection process and making it a bit more forward thinking, as well as dealing with the review at hand. There's a new clarification on the selection process, which relates to outcome data. So we are encouraging people to not forget that even though a study may report outcome data in a way that we can't use in the review, perhaps we can't add it to the meta-analysis because it's not reported in the same way as the other studies, that we don't just exclude it from the review. It should be included in the review and mentioned in the results and its implications discussed. It may just not feature in the meta-analysis. So studies that collect outcomes should be included in the review, even if they don't all report the outcome in the same way. There's some clearer direction in the section on selecting the methods of selecting studies. So how many people should be involved in the screening process. So it now says really, it now says in the title and abstract screening section that ideally 2 people should be screening independently in duplicate, but it is acceptable that initial screening is undertaken by only 1 person. So hopefully that wording is now a bit clearer than it was before about what is ideal and what is acceptable. But then for full text screening, we've made it very clear that it is essential to have 2 people screening, 2 people involved in screening, doing parallel independent screening with a 3rd person to resolve disagreements. So hopefully this is a bit clearer than the previous wording. This section is about applying the eligibility criteria, and there's only one very minor change in this section, and that is when we're thinking about pilot testing the eligibility criteria during screening of studies, we've just reduced the number of reports that you might want, that is given as an example of how many might be suitable for doing in a pilot testing approach. So this is now reduced just slightly to 6 to 8 reports. And this is just also not an essential, it's just a consideration, a recommendation, guidance, not a mandate. So in the section that talks about recording excluded studies, there is a small clarification. This is really to give people guidance about how many, on average, studies we'd expect to see in an excluded studies table. So this is now specified as 30. And this is really, I think, just to emphasise to reviewers that this list should not be long. It should really be, as it says in the top bullet point there, only studies that a reader might plausibly expect to see among the included studies. So it means that, you know, you should be doing much more screening of obviously irrelevant studies at title and abstract, rather than taking things that are clearly not relevant through to full text, and that's why the excluded, there is this guidance about the number of excluded studies now. There's a lot of new information in this edition of the handbook on software support to screen studies. We talk about some of the commonly used tools and tools that are currently in use in Cochrane, such as Covidence. And I think this is reflecting the fact that more and more people are using these tools and that they are giving us, real opportunities for efficiencies in the screening process. And also they are building on the fact that, demonstration projects have shown that automated screening is sort of developing fast and is increasingly being built into packages like these. So there's a lot of information there about people who are new to screening might find useful, or who are just at the stage of trying to choose some screening software. And we also have put in quite a lot of information about where things like machine learning can help us in the selection process. So we want people to know that these tools are available and could well be explored within the context of your systematic review to see if they might help you with efficiencies. So there are examples of the way this machine learning is being used in reviewing. For example, the RCT classifier we know is built into some software such as EpiReviewer at the moment, and this can identify reports of RCTs to a high degree of accuracy, and is also being used to identify RCTs for inclusion in Central. There are, in many of the packages that you've seen on the previous screen, there are machine learning modules that you can train. You can teach the software the difference between relevant and irrelevant studies, and then after a period of training, the software can go away and make decisions and prioritize studies that are likely to be relevant for your particular questions. And this can extend beyond the methods classification to looking at things like subject and looking at other aspects of your PICO. So these are tools that are available in many of the software packages that we are starting to use more frequently and can be explored as part of our review work. The other group who we've emphasised in the handbook section is the Cochrane Crowd. Cochrane Crowd is Cochrane's citizen science platform and is the sort of hundreds and thousands of willing volunteers out there who currently do screening of RCTs to go into Central, but are also can be called upon to help out with screening exercises for other reviews. We also just highlight that the fact that these new that natural language processing tools are available that can highlight sentences and key phrases within records, for example, population or the intervention terms or trial characteristics. And the very fact that they can highlight these words within records might help you to be able to screen records more quickly or more easily. There is a section from the previous handbook that has now been removed, and this is the section on measuring agreement. There is no requirement to measure agreement among screeners statistically. The emphasis is now that reviewers should review and discuss disagreements during screening, because it's far more important to have a full discussion, I think, than to try to just have a statistical assessment. So those are the main changes in the handbook chapter. There is also now a technical appendix 4, which is about managing references, and this gives information on bibliographic management packages, which will help with managing and deduplicating search results, and also on algorithms for deduping. So this is potentially helpful information if you're just beginning a review and you're not already well established in your bibliographic management processes. And that's all I was going to cover today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, and for being bang on time as well. Okay, brilliant. We've got a few questions that are coming through for you. The first is from Alicia, and she asks, is it ever acceptable to only do the full text screening and not the title abstract screening? It says, a researcher seems to think that what they are looking to find will only appear in the full text and not the abstract and title, so they don't want to do that step, and I'm having trouble convincing them that isn't a good idea.
I guess if you're fortunate enough to have the resources to do that, to just obtain the full text of all of the results of your search, then that would be a lovely way to go. I guess just not many people might have those resources. Also, it suggests to me there's a very precise search, because potentially you could have many, many thousands of results. Not all searches generate thousands of results, but quite a lot do. So I guess, yeah, if you've got the resources and you're willing to look through all of those full texts, I think that would be wonderful. I can understand why somebody would be cautious like that. I'm sure that if we think about all sorts of topics, this particular outcomes would not be mentioned in the abstract, and the only way you would find them for definite would be to look at the full text. But yes, I guess you could only do that if somebody was willing and had the resources to obtain the full text of all of the search results.
Brilliant. The next question is from Igor, and the question is, any selection and screening tools that you recommend for case reports?
Okay, I don't think that's really interesting. Yeah, as I was saying, you could certainly have a go at trying to train. You could use software. So, for example, Distiller SR, Epi Reviewer. I'm sure other packages would enable you to teach the software which records you're interested in. So I guess you could take a set of results, which was a mix of case reports and non-case reports, and work through a couple of hundred, telling it this one's a case report, this one isn't, or this one's relevant, this one isn't, and then set it off and see what happened. That would be certainly, you could certainly try that. I suspect that to find case reports, probably the easiest way is to use not something fancy like machine learning, but to develop an internal search filter that will just find those studies. So, for example, they're likely to have a publication type case report. They're likely to have maybe a subject heading for case reports, or some sort of designation in the subject headings for case report. And also the terminology that people use within case report studies is also quite easy to focus in on within the abstract. So people talk about case presentations, case report, case reviews. You could build a small internal filter to work in EndNote that would help you to focus in on those studies perhaps more quickly than training a machine learning package. But I'm sure in the future what we will see, maybe not for case reports, but certainly for other types of study design, I'm sure we will see, because people don't do many reviews of case reports, what we will see is more and more machine learning packages that will look for different types of study design.
Brilliant. Our next question is it acceptable that two people share the workload of single screening and selecting of studies?
I guess you'd probably want to do, we haven't addressed that. So first off, we haven't addressed that in the handbook, so that sort of scenario is not mentioned. I suspect that to ensure that you are making selections in a similar fashion, you would want to have a run-in period where you both looked at the same records to try and make sure you were making the same decisions as each other and had a broad, very, you know, not a broad agreement, a definite agreement, rather than being disparate. Because that might, you know, one person might be making a selection based on one assumption and the other person may be making it on a different one. So I think you'd want to do a bit of training and a bit of calibration first. But then I guess if you were in reasonable agreement, then that would probably work.
Brilliant. And I think we have time to squeeze just one more question in. So this one comes from Gina. If you could only select 2 screening softwares for a review, which would you personally prefer to use, or would you recommend?
Personally, I like Covidence. I like Covidence a lot. I like Covidence. If I've got a choice, I would go with Covidence.